Hi, I'm Mohammed, and I'm the data scientist at Choose. We are a nonprofit org founded in 2000, whose mission is to make it easy for anyone to help a teacher in need, moving us closer to a nation where students in every community have the tools and experiences they need for a great education. And in this presentation, I'll talk specifically about how we at Donors Choose are using DBT to make equity transparent while adding more security to our teacher demographic data. So here's a really quick overview of what I'm going to cover. So the first thing is the actual need that we have to make equity metrics available to all staff, the problems that we ran into in finding a balance between transparency of demographic insights and teacher privacy. And lastly, and most importantly, how we use DBT to enable our new equity aggregates solution. So to begin, I want to describe how the Donors Choose website works just a bit. So on Donors Choose, donorschoose.org, any public school teacher in the USA can create a project page. They can select items from our partner vendors to add to their project. And after writing a blurb about their students and why they selected those specific items for their students, their projects go live on our site with the total dollar value at the top that is needed to fully fund that project. So once the project goes live, at that point, donors can partially or fully fund the project. If it's fully funded, then Donors Choose, or specifically our fulfillment team, orders the items that the teachers wanted and ships those items directly to the teacher's school. So some quick fun facts about our org. So far, we've had over $1 billion with the dollars worth of materials and experiences funded through Donors Choose. Teachers at 86% or so of America's 100,000 or so public schools have posted a project on our site. And altogether, we've delivered on over 2 million projects with the help of 5 million donors. And we're still going strong. So with all that being said, tracking equity is a cornerstone of our mission. Donors Choose staff have constantly been on top of key metrics like revenue, number of projects on our site, number of active donors, et cetera. We've always been focused on equity in education, given the history of segregation in the US education system. And the national conversation about equity inspired us to think even more deeply about equity in our work than we had before. One way to do that was to break our key metrics down by demographics, such as teachers' self-identified race and school need, so that we could track all that separately. So let's take a look at who needs this data and some of our competing goals. So here's the actual challenge. Different people across the org have different needs in terms of access based on their job responsibilities. And we want to give access to detailed data only when absolutely necessary. So for example, a product manager or a marketing manager might need more specific individualized data to run detailed analyses and strategy plans targeting equity directly. Whereas someone on our accounting team or a fellow who might be with us for like a year or less may only need more broad aggregated data. At Donors Choose, we believe that all staff absolutely needs to see the big picture and have the ability to raise questions about our impact on different teacher groups. But not everybody uses our internal business intelligence tool, Looker, in the same way. So not everyone needs all the details. So when designing a solution, we tried to balance those two competing goals of teacher privacy and transparency and wanted to ensure that everyone has the info they need to do their job, but not private info that they don't really need. And the solution that we came up with is an equity aggregates Looker Explorer, where you can find summarized high-level key metrics and slice them by teacher race, school need level categories, and different timeframes like month or year. When folks spot a signal based on this private or public aggregated info, they can then request more info or more access to detailed demographic data, or they can collaborate with an equity analyst at the org that already has access to that data if they want to dig deeper. So this is the current steady state at Donors Choose. We have two kinds of access to equity data. The first one is that more detailed data that I mentioned, where users can see individualized data per teacher or per school and can slice that data by any dimension they want. On the other hand, equity aggregates are this new product that gives some insight into how we're doing on the major indicators. They are summary measures only, and users can see 3 levels of data based on timeframes. They can see daily aggregates, fiscal year level aggregates so far, and rolling 366-day window aggregates. You can't slice this data too much because it's pre-calculated. Also, the race data is a bit more broad. Users can only break down by white teachers versus teachers of color. With DBT, we created several models that each do a single equity aggregate. Each model has a total column for the aggregate and several breakdown columns. So for example, in our revenue aggregate model, we have total daily revenue for the entire site with columns for how much went to high need schools versus how much went to low need schools, and how much went to white teachers versus how much went to teachers of color. And to run these models, we make very heavy use of DBT's incremental materialization. Our nightly jobs simply add new rows every night instead of running all of our historical data over every night. And that saves us a ton of time. And lastly, these models empowered that new Looker Explorer specifically dedicated to equity aggregates that I talked about. So this is an example of what one of these DBT models actually looks like. This is our revenue applied to projects model. Note that there are 3 rows for each day. The first row tells you what actually happened on the day of June 15th. So in this case, you'll see $700,000 total on June 15th. The second row is what happens in the fiscal year up until June 15th. So for us, the fiscal year begins in July. So the second row is summed up revenue from July 1st, 2020 to June 15th, 2021. And the last row is a rolling sum of the last 366 days up until June 15, 2021. So you can see the total measure value in the measure underscore value column and a couple of the breakdown columns to the right. So for example, like I said, on June 15th, we raised a total of $700,000. Of that money, $400,000 went to projects posted by teachers of color, and $500,000 went to what we at DonorsChoose call equity focus schools. An equity focus school is our own internal designation that we use to mark schools with high need and a high percentage of historically underserved minority students. And the idea is to generate these 3 rows every day and incrementally add them to our revenue applied to projects table. All right, so I've given you the overview. Now let's dig a little bit into some of the implementation steps. So I'm bringing this slide back so that we can talk a little bit about the data behind this. The data related to the entire flow gets pretty complicated pretty quickly, but just a really quick overview. Anytime I say project data, that means anything related to the actual project posting on the site. And that includes the demographics of the teacher, the need level of the school, whether that project actually ended up funded or not, and then a bunch of timing, like when the project was submitted to us, when it was actually posted on the site, and when it was actually funded, if it was funded. And then we have donation data, which includes the kind of payment a donor uses. So like a credit card or Apple Pay or Google or whatever, how much money they gave us and when they gave us that money. For the aggregates, we aggregate that data from our website, like number of projects and number of donations. And for the breakdowns, we link that data to teacher demographic data that we collect through surveys from our site and school demographic data that we get from the National Center for Education Statistics. And you can look that data up if you want, it's completely public. So here I've laid out the steps that each of our aggregate models actually takes. So first we create this thing called the dates find. I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but it's basically a list of dates and date related fields that help us do the aggregates based on time boxes that we care about. We grab that website and demographic data I talked about, and we do the sums and counts that we want and group them into aggregates. And then we lastly use the incremental update every night to add those new rows to our aggregate tables. Like I mentioned before, for each model, we have 3 levels. There's the daily, which is just a group by date. We have a fiscal year, which is, again, a group by fiscal year. And we have a rolling 366-day window function that works on each of these models. And these are the 3 levels of like time data that stakeholders at DonorsChoose wanted. Now, I'll talk a little bit about some of the pre-built macros that we've been using. We are huge fans of the datesfind function in dbt. Highly recommend. Datesfind generates a list of dates and was really helpful in linking different metrics to that daily report. Here's an example of just a small slice of our datesfind table. The datesfind function just generates that first column, the list of dates, but you can transform that any way you want. You can pull out the fiscal year, you can pull out the actual calendar year, you can even add a column which just has holidays, which you would have to define yourself. And we use these generated columns to bound our aggregates and sum only across the time periods that we want. This is how we get that fiscal year column to group by, and then we can use another column, which is like a 366 days ago column, to do something like a aggregate where your number is between column A and column B. And then the pivot macro is another favorite. At the top, you'll see some code from one of our models that uses the pivot macro. And the bottom is what that macro compiles to. Just like an Excel sheet, the pivot macro pivots values from rows to columns. Instead of writing a bunch of case when breaking down metrics by different teacher or school demographics, we just use the pivot macro to do it programmatically. This saves us a ton of time to write each category, and it's really dry. All you have to do is maintain your list of possible field types in one place, and it propagates throughout the macro, or throughout every place that uses the macro. And we pretty much use this macro everywhere. So inspired by the built-in macros, we also decided to use a bunch of custom macros. We had to build quite a few metrics for this Equity Aggregates Explorer, but a lot of the aggregates are actually really similar. So for models that are similar, we just created a single macro with different parameters. So for example, for the revenue macro, or for the revenue model that I mentioned earlier, it actually comes from an internal revenue macro. That macro includes a parameter that helps us filter the model for only revenue for a corporate partner donor or for an individual donor, for example. All we need is a single parameter to flip that switch on and off. So talking about incremental updates, running these models incrementally helps us cut down their runtime by a lot, which makes us and our data warehouse Redshift very happy. And this is just one example of our number of teachers posting new projects model. On full refresh, it takes like 20 minutes-ish. And if you do it incrementally every night, it becomes less than a minute. The reason it takes so long is because we're doing a count distinct, and count distincts are hard. So to end the session, I'd love to talk about impact. So already some of our staff are using that new Equity Aggregates Explorer and Looker to look at things that are important to their work. So for example, the marketing team cares a lot about revenue, so they'll keep an eye on how revenue is distributed among different school types or teacher demographics. A bonus outcome is that we've now integrated the equity aggregates from dbt into our org-wide daily dashboard, which is an email that gets sent every morning to all staff with a bunch of our several key metrics. The data team here feels really honored that our work with equity aggregates and dbt is being recognized and that people are excited to surface that data in such an important place. dbt has been a massive help, and we're looking forward to all the places it can take us. One last thing that I wanted to plug real quick. I wanted to let you know that Donors Choose is now hiring a new director of data for our data team. If you liked what you saw, you'll get to work on projects like these and so much more for one of the most awesome nonprofits on the planet. Questions?
It's awesome. That's really cool. Great work. I mean, I'll ask a question while people are thinking, but how long did all this take?
Oh yeah, good question. Let's see. I want to say we started like from front to back. It probably took like 2 or 3 months to do like a first set of equity aggregate models, like our like MVP type thing, from like ideation to actual completion. Because we started in like, yeah, we started like basically a little after the holiday season, so like February, Marchish.
And how many folks were working on it from your side?
This was before Kim, just 3 people. So the director of our team, me, and then our junior analytics engineer. I basically stopped like a lot of my machine learning work to help with this. because it was
That looks
like
very,
Z prio for the data team.
that looks awesome. Georgi, I saw you came off of mute. Did you have a question or?
I was actually gonna ask exact same question. You just asked how many people were there. So you did. Thanks.
Cool. Good
Yeah, I
teamwork.
mean,
Great minds.
yeah, we also had like, folks across the org test it, but that's like a bunch more people. But yeah, three main folks.
I had two quick questions. Roughly what share of teachers do self-identify by race?
Fun question. About half. So, right. So we have the survey on a couple of different places in our site. And yeah, so far we have responses from about half of active teachers. And then you have to account for the fact that like, when folks get that question, there's, you have to make like an other thing available because people can identify anything, right? And a decent amount of responses are things that you wouldn't expect, like well, I guess you would expect, like there's only one race, human race, American, like there's a bunch. We've been thinking about ways to like increase that number, but I don't know where we are with that.
At our company, we also use demographic data. It's about the same percentage of people who put their demographic data, and different product completely, but yeah, similar numbers. Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I had one other quick question, which is, I think you said something earlier, like you said you keep reprocessing things for 3 days to account for late arriving events or something like that. Do you have a way of handling cases where events potentially arrive later than that?
Oh, no, I didn't even think about that. I guess we should, right?
Let's do it. I mean, want to unpack that a little bit? Where your
Yeah.
suggestion came from?
Yeah, it's something I've experienced a little bit before where we kind of have a look back window, but sometimes things come in like they're late arriving or you have to backfill data and you have to have some kind of way to kind of stage it or manually pull the data in. It's also possible too that never happens or that, especially with financial data, sometimes once it's set, it's unlikely to change later and then it's not relevant.
Yeah,
so this is
no, go for it, Mohammed. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, it's like all web transaction data. We have a 3-day look back period. And also I think because we're dealing with like aggregates, my guess is that like a thing that happens at like that comes in more than 3 days late would probably not change an aggregate that much. Because we're talking about like, for example, for revenue, we're talking about like on the order of like hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars. And like, I'm hoping that like a payment event that arrives more than like 3 days late, like I'm hoping that accounts for a very small portion of like money.
Well, Mohammed, I guess you know what you're doing next week, right? dig in to see if any events came in twice or late. I think that makes sense. Actually, on that, following the same lines of Sam's question, what we're talking about now is how does this reconcile with the financial, world, like the finance team, the P&L? Like, I feel like there's usually these operational statistic, KPIs that we have in our BI tool, and then a different cut of, say, revenue or donations or kind of gross profit that's done in the financial systems. Is there a separate world, and where do they get compared?
Yeah, for us, so the finance team uses their own systems to do pretty much everything. They do use Looker for like some revenue totals, but they actually they look more into the raw transactional database or a replica of that database instead of using the BI tool because it's more up to date because we don't account for things like payment deletions, and it's a little more confusing to use like a BI tool than the systems they've already had in place for years because we've adopted Looker relatively recently.
Makes sense.
Yeah, but I'm not too sure about like how much actual overlap there is.
Cool. And then I got to ask it because you're on Redshift. What are your sort and distribution keys on this?
Oh yeah, forgot.
Darcy's smiling at my question. It's a good question. Does anybody else have any questions? I'm figuring, maybe a minute or two more questions, and then we'll kind of move on to our break and then our next talk.
I have a quick question. How many DBT models did you guys create in order to accomplish this?
I think we have like 40 or 50 maybe right now.
Just for this project that you talked about.
Yeah, but it's from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 macros generate 40-ish models. It's all like switching parameters and stuff. And on the sort and
I feel like you need to do an office hours to do a detailed walkthrough, because I feel like Georgi wants to go like 3 levels deeper.
It's pretty deep. Yeah. So incremental, we have no dist key, but we're just sorting on the date, the like actual report date field.
That makes sense. Cool. Well, we got one question. Alon, do you want to ask the question that we've got in the Zoom chat?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is coming from the one and only Clark Kent. I understand the gesture for racial equity. However, wouldn't the demographics of the students or their access to resources offer a better model compared to the demographic/race of the teacher?
Oh, that is a very deep question. So when we talk about equity-focused schools, specifically, we do account for student demographics. Like part of the definition of an equity-focused school is that you must be, I think, above 50% Black, Latinx, Indigenous student population based on NCES data. So we do account for that for one of our metrics, but also we do care a lot about teachers because, I mean, there's so many reasons. Lots of studies showing that teachers of color are really important for like role models for students of color. Retention is important. There's like so many ways that teachers of color are differentially affected by like nonsense in the education system. So it's important to focus on both. And Donor Shoes is doing a lot more research in that too. We're actually partnering with a bunch of big donors and a foundation to do like specifically male teachers of color surveys to understand the experience of, well, male teachers of color. I don't think a survey like that's been done at this scale ever. So yeah, more to come. Look out for a blog post on that in the next, I don't know, a couple of months, hopefully. But yeah, both are important.
Amazing. Well, thanks for showing the kind of this great work. It's really impressive. I always love when people use kind of data superpowers for good. So thank you for taking the time to talk about this, and thanks for kind of, all the great work you do over at Donor Shoes. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you all for listening and for the awesome questions.
And then Georgi is going to send you lots of messages about digging deeper into those 40 models. Cool. Thanks again. So now we are at our intermission. We're going to put some intermission slides. No intermission music. And Alon, you want to kind of talk about this slide?
Sure. It's kind of maybe self-explanatory, but we did want to mention that in honor of today's talk, Brooklyn Data is donating $250 across 5 historically underfunded schools in the New York City area, and would encourage folks with means to potentially consider doing the same thing.
And here's some commentary we've got from the programs that we've donated to. And it's really exciting. Like, I mean, one of the things I love about Donor Shoes is just like so quick and easy. You don't have to write big checks and you can kind of make a real difference. Like, I mean, April, we're already getting a lot of really great comments from the schools. Is that right?
Yeah, we've gotten messages directly from the actual teachers at these schools. So it's really neat to see, and just the things that they want to do for their kids is really cool. So, and the projects are some of them are fairly small. You can donate as much as you want. It's a pretty cool platform.